It's my pleasure to welcome this afternoon Professor Andrea Falcon. Professor Falcon began his studies at the University of Venice, where he was laureated, as the Italians say. For those who love the beautiful, his move to the University of Padua might be described as a sacrifice, though by the architectural standards prevalent in American cities and on American city university campuses, not a sacrifice as to evoke our pity. He has held visiting positions at Ohio State, the University of Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech, and the Institute of Advanced Study. In 2005, he joined the Department of Philosophy at Concordia University in Montreal, which is, from an architectural point of view, not too shabby a city. In 2008, he was appointed Associate Professor of Philosophy, and he has remained there since. He already has three books to his credit. Just this year, Cambridge published Aristotelianism in the 1st century BCE, Xenarchus of Seleucia. And in 2005, Cambridge published his Aristotle and the Science of Nature, Unity Without Uniformity. Before that, back in 2001, he published Corpi, Movimenti Studio sul Cielo di Aristotele e la sua tradizione mondo antico, and forgive me my accent. Apart from that, he has about a dozen articles to his name and maybe half a dozen dictionary entries, at least according to the CV I have, and many more things in the work. So please warmly welcome with me Professor Falcon. There are handouts here if you don't have one. I'd be happy to.
Yes, make sure you have a handout. We are going to work on the handout, so thank you for this presentation, and thank you for inviting me here at the Catholic University of America to give a talk on a book that is very dear to me, the Anima. The Anima is not only a great, immensely influential book, it's also a significant innovation. Let me explain why. Aristotle is the first to offer a comprehensive, fully developed study of the soul. He is also the first to treat the soul as a subject matter, a separate subject matter. The reason for this innovation is his interest in life, not an interest in this or that type of life, but in life in general. It's because Aristotle is interested in life that he is interested in the soul rather than vice versa. Hence, an optimal study of life requires a study of the soul, at least for Aristotle. So we will come back to these claims. I hope that they are not too controversial, but please look at text number 4 in your handout, just the beginning of the De Anima. Knowledge of the soul is thought to contribute greatly to all truth, but especially to truth about nature, for the soul is, as it were, a principle of living beings. Today, I would like to make some progress on the relationship between the study of the soul and the study of life by focusing on the following two questions. How does Aristotle conceive of the study of life? How does the study of the soul, offered into the Anima, contribute to the study of life? I will start from the second question. So how does the study of the soul offered into the Anima contribute to the study of life? But I'm ultimately interested in the first of the two questions about Aristotle's study of life. And I think that to some extent 1 and 2 are related. There are two ways in which the anima may be thought to contribute to a study of life. As it were, from within the study of life, as a part of the study of life, or, as it were, from without, as an autonomous investigation. So now we have to, that's going to be an important question, how we want to now, how Aristotle conceived of the study of the soul with respect to the study of life. I think that the first text in my handout may help us. This is from the opening lines of the De Sensu. In this passage, Aristotle establishes a link between the study of the soul and the study of life, since it was determined before about the soul. It is next to be investigated about animals and everything that has life. I will return to the significance of the words animal and everything that has life in the second part of my talk. For the time being, let's just start with what is more obvious before moving to what is less obvious and potentially more controversial. First, it's clear that the study of the soul comes before the study of animals and everything that has life. We can take this order to be a reflection of the foundational role that the anima plays for the study of animals and everything that has life. In the second part of the passage, text 1, Aristotle tells us that he will build on the results reached in his study of the soul. Let's assume, he says, what was said about the soul. Let's speak about the rest. First, about what is first. That can't be more clear than this. This suggests that the study of the soul conducted in the De Anima is to be regarded as first, I think, in the order of explanation. In other words, the study provides the explanatory starting point for the investigation of animal and everything that has life announced at the beginning of the De Sensu. I speak of order of explanation because I think that the ultimate goal of the project is to provide explanation. So it's an order of study, but it's also an order of explanation. This was the first thing, which seems to be fairly clear from the text. Second, it's also clear that the study of the soul and the study of animals and everything that has life are to be integrated into a single explanatory project. Yet, how this integration is conceived by Aristotle remains to be seen. More specifically, the integration envisioned in the opening lines of the De Sensu need not be a case of assimilation. There is, on the one hand, no doubt that the sum of the results achieved in the study of the soul are presupposed in the study of animals and what has life, the ensouled beings. On the other hand, the study of the soul does not have to be part of this latter study. Does not have to be a part. In fact, it's possible to read our passage, the one that we have here, text 1, as suggesting that Aristotle as suggesting that there is an interesting transition from the study of the soul to the study of life. It's possible to read the passage as saying that Aristotle has completed the study of the soul and is ready to turn his attention to another kind of investigation. Not just another investigation, another kind of investigation. On this interpretation, the integration of the De Anima with the rest of the writing on animals and everything that has life does not entail assimilation. of the Anima to what is called, for lack of a better word, Aristotle biology. Okay? So I will try to defend this reading of this passage and of the Anima. It's not assimilated to biology, but it is to be integrated with it. Now, this text I find very interesting and also difficult, so I would like to spend a little bit of time on it. There are two alternative readings of the first clause, the epei clause. If for those of you who can also check the Greek, there is there the Greek. The first clause, which contains a description of the Anima. Both readings are given by Alexander of Aphrodisias in his commentary. The first reading, and you have them as well, text 2 and text 3, both in Greek and in English. The first reading takes the study of the soul to be divided into two parts. A study of the soul in itself, followed by a study of each of its powers taken individually. When Aristotle says it was determined earlier concerning the soul in itself and concerning each of the powers of the soul taken individually, one reading number 1, is this. It was determined concerning the soul in itself, meaning separately concerning the soul as a whole, generally and universally, and separately concerning each of its parts and powers. That's text 2. Okay. That's one way in which you can unpack the text. To appreciate how Alexander or may have understood the opening line of the sensus according to this reading, we have to recall that at the beginning of the second book of the De Anima, Aristotle begins his positive account of the soul with what he calls the most common account of the soul, the koinotatos logos, the most comprehensive account of the soul. Alexander clearly takes the most common, most comprehensive account of the soul to be a general study of the soul. For Alexander, Aristotle speaks in common, koinos, and in general, katholu, and about the soul as a whole, peri oles psyches. This language can be found in the Anima 2:1. Aristotle ends his most common account of the soul by saying that it has been said what the soul is in general, katholu. He also introduces his definition of the soul as actuality, or first actuality of a natural organic body, as follows. If something common, koinon, is to be said about the soul as a whole, peri basis psyches. Okay, I think that this is clearly in the background of this reading. In the Anima, Aristotle tells us that it would be ridiculous to stop at such a general level of analysis, the level that we have in the Anima 2:1. The most appropriate study of the soul is a study of each of the relevant types of soul, nutritive, perceptive, and intellective souls. Since each of the relevant type of soul can be understood as a package of power, the serial study of the relevant types of soul amounts to a study of each of the relevant powers. However, this strategy does not entail that the general account of the soul is eventually dispensable or is ultimately dispensable. You can do without it. Quite the contrary, the scientific treatment of the soul we have in the Anima consists of the combination of a general account of the soul and the specific account of each of the different types of soul or powers of the souls. A discussion of the epistemological reasons that might have motivated Aristotle's discussion is to adopt this strategy, so to begin with a general account, or the most common account, and then go on with separate accounts of each of the relevant souls, is beyond the scope of this discussion. We can come back to it later if you want. What matters for the present discussion is that the pay clause, the clause, the beginning, the since clause that you have in your translation, is, if it is read in this way, contains a precise description of the contents of the second and third book of the De Anima, if you take this reading. So on this reading, the opening lines of the sensu would not simply make contact with the De Anima, they would also give us an outline of the argumentative strategy. It's not clear, or not clear to me, why Aristotle would have felt the need to recall in outline here, at the beginning of the sensus, the strategy of the De Anima. It's not clear to me, at least, how recalling this argumentative strategy may have helped Aristotle to connect the study of the soul with the study of animals and what as life announced in our passage. So I'm not sure I see why he needed this, even though this is an interesting reading of the text. So in light of this difficulty, I suggest turning to the second alternative reading of the clause. It's text number 3. On this reading, the word itself, the study of the soul in itself, is introduced not to recall the distinction within the study of the soul between separate study of the soul and each of its power, but rather to contrast the study of the soul we have in the De Anima and the study that Aristotle is about to launch at this point. By the way, the opening line of the sensus is about the project we call Parva Naturalia. It's not just about the sensus. So he's about to launch another project, and he is connecting and contrasting this new project with the previous one. So text 3, alternatively, Aristotle said concerning the soul in itself, because it was not also determinate concerning the body. That's the alternative reading as in text 3. So on this alternative reading, the De Anima is an investigation characterized by a relative lack of interest for the body in which the soul is always realized. As Aristotle moves away from the study of the soul, he is ready to turn to the study of the body in which the soul is realized. Textual support for such a division of labor can be found at the outset of the sensu, in the part that is at the very end of our text 1. Aristotle is not content to announce a study of the praxis, activities of the animals and everything that has life. He adds that these activities are common to the soul and the body. They are common to the soul. So let's assume what we said about the soul, and let's now move on to a study of what is common to the soul and the body. This second reading of the Epei clause is adopted, among others, by Berbeke in his Latin translation of the sensu. And that is on page 2, the footnote, because I think I'm now ready to offer you, a T1, a revised translation of text 1, so the T1 with a star. And there is also a footnote there where you have the Latin text. He reads the Greek as follows: Quoniam autem de anima secundus se ipsam determinatum est, and de virtute qualibet ex parte ipsius. Sorry for the typo. His translation adds one important element to the interpretation developed up to this point. Berbeke takes the Greek kata morion together with autes and renders these three words with the Latin ex parte ipsius, ex parte anime. it's quite clear that ex parte anima is to be connected and indeed contrasted with ex parte corporis. So on this translation, the opening line of the De Sensu would describe the De Anima as a study of the soul and the study of each of its powers, considered from the point of view of the soul. This is now okay, my now revised translation. It seems to me that this second reading makes better sense of the opening line of the De Sensus. On this reading, at the outset of his investigation, Aristotle tells us what is new in the study is about to launch. He also gives us a way not only to contrast, but also to connect the study is about to launch, the study of animals and everything that has life. We still have to go back to that. At some point we will, with the study of the soul conducted in the De Anima. On this reading, whereas in the De Anima Aristotle was concerned with the powers, the dunamis of the soul, to the extent they contributed to the study of the soul, the opening lines of the De Sensus announce a study of the activities, the praxis, pertaining to animal and everything that has life. This ends one part of my presentation. I do think that I have checked around, of course, this translation of this interesting text, and most translators gloss over the section, the words katam orion autes. So I don't think I have found precise translation. That's why, and I think there is something to be said about how best to translate this text. And of course, there is a text that is also providing information about how Aristotle conceives of the De Anima in connection with the study of life. Now, what I want to do before returning to these interesting words, animals and everything that has life, I want to go and look at the beginning and the opening line of the De Anima. So I want to return briefly to text number 4. The second part of that passage may be taken as additional evidence for the distinction drawn at the outset of the soul, the distinction between a study of the soul and a study of animals and everything that has life. The second part reads as follows: we seek to study and have knowledge of the nature of the soul and the nature and being of the soul, and then of the things that come along in relation to it. Some of them are thought to be affections proper to the soul, whereas others are thought to be living, to belong to the living beings on account of the soul. There is one word missing there, to belong to the living beings on account of the soul. Here we are told that we have to know first about the soul and then about the things that come along in relation to the soul. Hosa sun bebeke peri auten. Aristotle is maybe intentionally vague when he speaks of things that come along in relation to the soul, as he then further distinguishes them into attributes that belong to the soul and attributes that belong to living beings in virtue of the soul. Still, there is no doubt that Aristotle envisions two projects to be approached in a definite order. Again, the Greek is carefully crafted to remain open with respect to the distinction introduced within the second project. While some things are thought to belong to the soul alone, others are thought to belong to the living things in virtue of the soul. In other words, The decision to focus on the soul does not entail endorsement of the view that there are attributes that belong to the soul to the exclusion of the body. In other words, the decision to study the soul in itself does not entail a commitment to the separability of the soul from the body. At least at this stage, Aristotle is not yet committed to the separability of the soul from the body. It's telling that when a few lines below, noting your endowed, Aristotle turns to the attribute of the soul, his working hypothesis is that the soul is not separable from the body, as its attributes are manifestly common to the body and the soul. Thinking is introduced as an attribute that may pertain to the soul to the exclusion of the body. But Aristotle is very careful there not to endorse this view. At this stage of his argument, very early on, just the first chapter, thinking is presented as a possible exception to the rule. So this subsequent investigation and the separability of the soul from the body is not something I need to discuss here, because I don't think that my reading of this passage depend on that. In fact, I think that regardless of what happens in the second part of this passage that I just read, what matters is that Aristotle seems to envision two studies or two stages in his investigation: a study of the soul, its being and its nature, and then a study of the things which happen in relation to it, which comes along in relation to the soul. And then there is going to be a question there whether there is any of these things which is proper to the soul, or whether they all belong to the living body in virtue of the soul. What matters for me, or for us here, is that the investigation, as it is conceived here, the subsequent investigation, confirm the commitment to hylomorphism, namely the view that the soul and the body are a certain type of unity, the unity of form and matter. But this is it's precisely this commitment that should alert us to the danger of equating the study of the soul we have into the anima to a study of the soul in isolation from the body. So it is not that kind of study Aristotle is envisioning in the opening line of the sensu, an investigation of the soul which does not take into account the body. This equation, the study of the soul as a study of the soul in isolation from the body, is to be rejected. The equation may be suggested by the second reading, the one I have endorsed, of the opening lines of the sensus, but we should resist this equation. This decision to study the soul does not entail the decision to enforce a division of labor between a study of the soul and a study of the body. At the same time, however, and that's the point, it's clear that there are serious limitations to what can be said about the body if one considers these questions from the point of view of the soul. The most common account we have at the outset of the second book illustrates this point very well. On the one hand, Aristotle is confident that this account confirms the hylomorphic unity of the soul and the body. At the end of his common account, it tells us that we should not ask whether the soul and the body are one any more than whether the wax and the shape are one. On the other, it's fairly clear that there is not much one can say about the body at this level of analysis, the general level of analysis of the anima 2-1. It's fairly clear that there is in fact very little he can say, besides the fact that this is a body that is organized in a certain way to support the soul as a source of life. This is, so again, I may want to elaborate, I may elaborate on this if then you want, or in our discussion later. I do think that we get this message from the Anima 2.1. The message is that there is to be a minimum level of organization in the body in order for it to be a living body. What kind of organization? Aristotle has a way to then describe and think about it. So minimally, the sort of organization that you have in plants, you need something which is a functional up and a functional down. An entry point for nourishment, and then another point for discharging the waste. But this is not just, it's not a silly point, it's a very abstract, interesting, and indeed powerful way of thinking about bodies. But that's the minimal level of organization that is required. So, and Aristotle is making here a point about life and organization. There is more to be said, of course. But what is interesting is this, that the Anima here, but also the rest of the Anima, says very little about the body. And this is interesting because at the same time, Aristotle is committed to hylomorphism, and the inseparability of the soul from the body, with the exception of thought, okay? As a more complicated question. But I think that's what is interesting about and interesting for me about the Anima. Vis-a-vis what we can read at the beginning of the sensu. So this is the end of the second part of my presentation. After the sensu and how there Aristotle presents his view of the study of the soul as contributing to the study of life. So I think it's possible to find some evidence for the same division of labor also in the Anima. So now I want to move on and return to our text one and to how Aristotle has conceived of the study of life. I want to introduce this with the following question. Why should Aristotle find the study of the soul to be conducted through a study of its powers, considered from the point of view of the soul, a compelling project in the first place? Now I am, at this point, adopting T1 star, the translation I'm offering you, the revised translation. So, but why Aristotle should find this project of a study of the soul a compelling project in the first place? The opening line of the De Anima, T4, they give us a good reason why we need to get clear about the soul. First, the soul is a sort of principle of living beings, Note, and that's very important, note that this passage does not entail that Aristotle's interest in the soul is limited or confined to its relevance to the study of life. Quite the contrary, this passage may be taken as evidence that the De Anima has theoretical implications which go beyond the narrow boundary of the study of living beings. And yet, this is an important concern for Aristotle already in the De Animas. Note that I have chosen to render the Greek ton zoon and tois zoi in the Greek. You have in the Greek of T4 as with the English living beings. this is a translation which I have defended elsewhere, the translation of zoa with living beings, not with animals. Here suffices to say that the task Aristotle sets for himself in the Anima is to clarify the concept of life. And one of the greatest achievements of the Anima, not the only one, but one very important achievement, at least for me, is that Aristotle is able to show not only that, but also why life is said in many ways. And this is a quote. Living, the beginning of Book 2, Chapter 2, living then, from which zoa, life, living is said in many ways. Living life, or living or life, is said in many ways. That animals and plants are two different types, and indeed levels of life, is a consequence of the view that life is said in many ways. In light of this achievement, it would make perfect sense for Aristotle to speak of living beings in the opening line of the De Anima. So it makes sense because it's a result to be secured, achieved in the course of the project. That there are different types of life. Plant life, animal life, human life. And of course, this is a result which has enormous consequences for Aristotle's explanatory project as a whole. And that's now what I want to turn to by now finally looking back on text 1 at this very interesting choice of words, animals and everything that has life. As we reflect on how best to translate the opening lines of the De Anima, it's natural to return to also the opening lines of the sensu. Since we are explicitly told that the sensu builds on the results that Aristotle has achieved in the De Anima, it's not open to us to assume that the distinction between animals and plants is not available to Aristotle in the opening line of the sensus. But this makes his choice of words even more interesting. Aristotle speaks of animals and everything that has life rather than animals and plants. He doesn't say animals and plants. He says animals and everything that has life. Of course, the phrase everything that has life contains a reference to plants, of course. But it would be a mistake, I think, to infer from this that the opening lines of the sensu announce a study of animals and plants based on the results reached in the investigation of the soul and its power. If this were what Aristotle had in mind, he would have spoken as of a study of ton zon, kai ton, fu ton, a study of animals and plants. Instead, he speaks of a study of ton on, kai ton, so e kon ton a panton, of everything which has so he, life, from which zoa in the opening line of the Anima. To study everything that has life is not just to study animals and plants. That's the point. To see why, we need now here briefly, really briefly, to recall the theory of science outlined in the Posterior Analytics. That theory requires Aristotle to give explanation at the right level of generality. Remember, one of his favorite examples in the Posterior Analytics is how to prove or to know the property of having the internal angles of a triangle equal to two right angles. He says that you know that triangles have that property only if you know that they have it as triangles. If you know that they have it as isosceles and scalene and equilateral triangles, you don't yet know. So you're missing a fact about geometry here. Okay? So it's very, very interesting how Aristotle thinks about finding explanations at the right level of generality. Huh? There is a genuine level, the level of triangle as such. Huh? And I think there are going to be, and this is a very important insight that shapes the way Aristotle is giving explanations in the corpus as well as in what we call biological works and the parva naturalia as well. So, and I think that this is behind his choice of words. Now, how can I prove it briefly? Well, quickly, in a very simple way. Just think about this passage, as I said at the beginning, as introducing not just the sensus, but what we call parva naturalia. These treatises, short treatises, are divided into two groups, naturally divided into two groups. The first group deals with activities that pertain to some, most, or even all animals. The sensu, the on memory and recollection, and then the on sleep, on dreams and divination in sleep. These treatises are dealing with animals, no? Or certain features that belong to all or to some animals. But then there is a second group of treatises, which is this group is concerned with aspects of life that are not restricted to animals. The on length and shortness of life, and on youth, old age, life, and death, and respiration. It is in the second group of essays that we find the most obvious example of common study of animals and plants. So in this second group, you find a study of certain features of life in common for animals and plants. Not surprisingly, the Aristotelian tradition has often considered this group of essays, to the extent that they are concerned with activities that are common to all living beings, including plants, as a sort of bridge between the study of animals and the study of plants. Okay, that's the best way for me to show you how, in a simple way, how already at the beginning of our text one, the opening line of the sensu, Aristotle is already thinking about what he's doing in all these short essays, and also signaling to us what he's going to do there. So, at this point, it should be clear that the opening lines of the sensu, that in the opening line of the sensus, Aristotle does not envision a study of the soul followed by a study of life. Okay, that's not what Aristotle has in mind there. Nor does he envision a study of the soul followed by a study of animals and plants. Rather, he envisioned the study of the soul followed by a study of animals and a study of what is common to animals and plants. To fully appreciate the implication of this approach, we need to pay attention to yet another interesting feature of Aristotle's explanatory project. There is one final aspect of his project which needs to be introduced. It's fairly clear that even when Aristotle ventures into a common study of animals and plants, he does, as he does in the group of essays that deals with longevity of animals and plants and the causes of their life and death, animals remain his primary focus. Even when he does that, animals are his focus. I derive this conclusion from passage 5 in your handout. So, page 2, passage number 5. This is from the end of the De Longitudine et Brevitate Vitae. So is investigation on why living beings, on longevity, why some animals live longer than others, or why plants live longer than animals, and so on. So, in looking forward to an investigation on the topic of youth and old age, life and death, Aristotle tells us that as soon as this other investigation is in place, his study of animals will have reached its goal. If this cross-reference is taken seriously, and I want to take it seriously, I think it's a surprise if you pay a surprising choice of words. So I want to take it as a serious, as coming from Aristotle himself. So both the investigation on the longevity of animals and plants and the investigation on life and death and respiration contribute directly and immediately to the study of animals. And this means that Aristotle's investigation of animals contain as one of its components an investigation of what is common to animals and plants. So it's in the course of the investigation of animals that Aristotle will also expand and offer investigations that are common to animals and plants, an investigation of features that are common to, or will offer explanations of features in common for animals and plants. So, the obvious question is why Aristotle opted for such an explanatory strategy. It's this is now question how Aristotle conceived, the one I introduced at the beginning, how he conceived of his study of life. So you can see how rich and complicated this project is. And here I want to say a few things on this explanatory strategy and open up for discussion. This, and offer and for further discussion, because I'm going beyond, of course, the scope of this paper. I think that Aristotle's study of life begins with the study of animals and goes on with the study of plants. So that's the Aristotelian approach to life, through animals. Why? Because animals can be more easily studied than plants. The study of what is common to animals and plants is pursued in the course of the study of animals and as a sort of bridge between the study of animals and the study of plants. Now, we don't know, by the way, whether Aristotle ever completed the study of plants. We don't know. The evidence that he wrote on plants is, to say the least, thin. We have on a list of his, on the catalog of his writings preserved by Diogenes Laertius, we have a mention of 2 books on plants. Alexander of Aphrodisia tells us that he did not have the books. The books were not available to him at the time. So maybe Galen, maybe he claims, maybe on a certain reading of the De Indolentia, he seems to say that, the text seems to say that he had the books, but he lost the books in the fire of his library. So very rare books, if those are the books he refers to. So there is very little evidence that Aristotle wrote on plants. Of course, we have this impressive corpus of writings on animals, what we call is the biological corpus. So, and if you, one text which has always fascinated me, and I think it's central for our understanding of the project, is text number 7, the one at the very end of your handout. It's the opening line of the Meteorology. This is a text which is very rich. It gives you, in a few strokes, it gives you the project as well as its structure. So this is not just a collection of writings. There is an explanatory project, and there is also a structure of this project. So you start from general physics, you go down to and continue with celestial physics, and then you move to the study of the sublunary world, and you end with a study of living beings. But now the only thing I need for today is to draw attention to the part where he describes the study of what we call life. It's the very end of this passage. After we have dealt with all these subjects, let's then see if we can give some account on the lines we've laid down of animals and plants, both in general and separately. So of animals and plants, not of plants and animals. So again, my reading is based also on the fact that this sequence of topics is also a sequence which reflects a certain view of how explanation should be given, what I call the order of explanation, how these things go to, that these investigations go together in a certain way, but the explanations have to be given in a certain order. So there is an order of study and learning, as well as an order of explanation, which is reflected here. And I don't think it's just a coincidence that animals come before plants. I want to conclude. So I think there is already a lot on the table, but let's see whether I can say something as a sort of provisional conclusion. And the Anima plays a foundational role for the study of life. For one thing, the justification for having separate studies of animals and plants is found in the Anima, not elsewhere. So if Aristotle has a study of animals and the study of plants, i.e. two separate studies, this is because he has proven into the Anima that life is said in many ways. There are different ways, different levels, types of life. There is also human life, of course. And then there is a question how much you say about the humans in the context of his biology, but that's another question. But the justification for having separate studies of animals and plants is found in the Anima. Note, however, that the Anima may be read as suggesting that the study of plants should come before the study of animals. The account of the different souls, vegetative soul, perceptive soul, and intellective soul, can be taken, has been taken in the Aristotelian tradition as also indication that you have to start with plants, go on with animals, and end with men. And yet, this is not how I think Aristotle proceeded in his actual practice of science. So we have this massive book corpus of writings on animals, and some evidence that he might have written on plants. Aristotle was a pragmatic investigator. He was a very smart investigator, but also a pragmatic one. He knew that plants are more difficult to study than animals. In his actual study of life, he started from what was more familiar to him, what also is more intelligible. So there is a lot to be said about the way in which then the study of animals is conducted, starting often from man in the Historia Animalium as well as, and then moving on with the blooded animals, and then only then with bloodless animals. Adapting, expanding on the resources that we have in place at that point. So, okay? So this is often the strategy in parts of animals, generation of animals, Historia Animalium. This is how he presents the data, how he explains the data in his biology. So, in his actual study of life, he started from what was more familiar to him, animals. The project was to adopt, and indeed adapt, the conceptual results achieved in the study of animals to the study of plants. As a way of conclusion, I just know that this is exactly what Theophrastus did in the Historia Plantarium and in the De Causis Plantarum. So we know, as I said, we don't know whether Aristotle wrote on plants, but we do know that his friend, colleague, Theophrastus, wrote on plants. And the interesting thing is that at the very beginning of the Historia Plantarium, he says we have to start from what we said, what we know about animals, and then from there adapt, change, of course, the study, and adapt what we know, the conceptual resources we have there, to something new. There is a very interesting article. There is a lot. This is one of the areas, by the way, in ancient philosophy where there is a lot to do. No one is really working on, that I know of, on HP and CP, on the conception, on the study of plants, and as preserved in the Theophrastic corpus, vis-a-vis what we know about Aristotle and his biological corpus. There is only a very interesting article by Alan Gotthelf on this, which I think is a very exciting paper, which was written several years ago, and now is reprinted in his collected paper, which is available. But that's it. So this is an area where there is a lot to be studied. So anyway, I think I can stop here for the moment. I think I have there is enough on the table for a discussion on, and I have touched on a number of topics having to do with the soul and the Aristotelian conception of this, the project of the study of the soul in his concept of the study of life. By the way, at this point, I hesitate to speak of study of life, because technically there is a study of different types of life. So he seems to be committed to the view that there are types of life, not life. And there is another philosophical issue. How much can you say in general about life? If you are Aristotle, how much can you say beyond what it says, say, at the beginning of Book 2 of the Anima, what we, following Aristotle, call the most comprehensive account of the soul? How much else can we really say about life in general? Thank you.